Two. Welcome back to the Biohacks Podcast. Today we are joined by a very special guest. We're joined by my good friend Monica Relph. She is an elite level rower, and basically we're going to be finding out a little bit more about what does it take to become an elite level rower, and some of the insights and guidance that she will have. So she's got some really insightful points. So Monica, thanks for coming on.
No, thanks for having me.
Do you want to give the guys a bit of a background, how you got into rowing?
Yeah, sure. So just to say, I mean, it was totally by accident. I was talent ID'd when I was at school. Talent identification
was that tall and talented?
It wasn't actually. It was the year before Tall and Talented. But some people might be familiar with the Tall and Talented. I mean, I was tall. I definitely wasn't talented. So I was walking through the sports hall at my school when I was like 16 years old, on the way out to have a fag behind the bike sheds, as you do, and got hollered by my PE teacher, and his name was Mr. French, really strange man, and basically said, like, yeah, you're the biggest girl in school, cheers, when you're 16 years old, being called big is great, isn't it? And you need to come and do this testing. So basically, yeah, I lined up in a queue with, I think, like, there's probably like 100 boys and like 2 girls, me and my friend Louise, who was also lanky, and did all these tests that are like, measure your arm span, your height, your weight, and then you have to do, like, do you know what a dyno is? Like, where you do the kind of testing, you have to like push out on a dyno, do a whole load of tests, and then they come up with a score, and then they compare that score to what an Olympic level rower's score would have been prior to training. No, I mean, I think I was the best of a bad bunch. Actually, they told me that once they selected me, they were like, yeah, we didn't have a very good year for you, so you may as well come on board. So I basically started rowing when I'd never even sat in a boat, and they gave me a coach, and it was all really exciting.
What school were you at? Whereabouts in the country?
Just the state school in Cambridge. So it's just a village college. We didn't have rowing at the school. I think I would be generous to say that I was sporty beforehand. Like, I was okay at sport, more because my dad had kind of pushed me into trying lots of different things.
Like netball and stuff, or
like netball, hockey. Yeah. I played rugby when I was like 5 to the age of 11, because my dad wished he'd had boys, but he had 3 girls and dragged us all down to the rugby pitch. And there's some more stories about that later, which I probably shouldn't get into in this podcast. So basically I started rowing, and I was so shit. For the first, honestly, like 3 years, I was just absolutely awful.
Really?
Like, would fall in more than I would not fall in. I think I lost dead last my first 16 races. I didn't even really enjoy training. I think there was just something in the back of my head that someone had said, if you do this, you could be good. And it's always appealed to me to be like world class at something, whether that's, you know, to be an expert at something, or to be kind of, and it was kind of special. You were training for something that was like bigger than what you had amounted to living in a little village, and, you know, but also it was a challenge because, you know, you're 16, 17, 18, and all your mates are going out, and you're like off down to the boathouse, and you don't really know what you're doing. And
was this on the
interacting with a totally
was the boathouse in Cambridge?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Cambridge, for anyone who doesn't know Cambridge, the Cam is like this windy, bendy little river where fishermen are so aggressive, and they literally would throw like maggots at your boat. And then there's me falling in and like refusing not to wear makeup to training because I was like 16, so I'd have like black mascara down my face and like maggots in my hair. It was just awful. So basically I spent like 3 years just being really crap at rowing, and then I got a coach called Mary, and she basically just taught me how to train.
Was she a game changer?
She taught me how to push myself. She taught me how to build my physiology. She taught me how to like get my body from kind of being like what I call skinny fat to being like really athletic. And I think I started noticing how much better I was getting in the gym and on the rowing machine. And then I basically decided to start trialing for the GB team. So at that point I was 19, and how it works in the, like most sports, there's junior level, and I was already too old for that, and then there's under 23, and then under 23 you obviously then move into senior. So I basically was trialing for the under 23 team, and all the good rowers at that point, women rowers for the under 23s, were based in Nottingham. So then I looked at going to Nottingham Uni, and it wasn't for me. So then luckily I got into Loughborough to do sports science, which is where I met you. and started training kind of properly training.
Interesting. And when you met Mary, was it purely a physiological change that she imparted in you, or how? Because obviously rowing's like very physiological sport, right? I guess it's like cycling or running or any of these sports. But I guess like how much technique and how much is technique and how much is physiology?
I mean, it's such a blend of both.
Is it?
Some people, if they are incredibly gifted physiologically, they can kind of get away with having not as good technique.
Okay.
And then vice versa, like if you're incredibly gifted technically, you don't have to be the biggest or the strongest.
Interesting. And if you get both together, then
it's like a magic blend.
Okay, yeah.
And obviously if you're in your single scull just by yourself, it doesn't really matter how bad your technique is if it's only you. But the minute you have to then merge that with another person to row in a pair, a 4, an 8, then that starts having a bigger impact.
Interesting.
Yeah. But with Mary, just to go back to that point, do you know what I actually think the turning point was? Because honestly, when I tell you I was bad, I was honestly really bad. Like the worst in my whole group. I'd always get bottom. I honestly, it's a surprise I didn't quit. But I think she just kept referring to me as being really tough, and I'd never really thought of myself as being tough before. And then actually I started reframing it and thinking, do you know what? Actually, a lot of people in my position, being so crap, would have actually quit. Yeah. But maybe there's something in the back of my head that's like that gnarly, like, I'm never going to quit, like the dog that just keeps coming back for more. Yeah. Calling myself a dog.
No, it's good. It's good. It's like one of my favorite UFC fighters, Jorge Masvidal, always talks about the dog. He's like the dog in me. So it's quite a nice reference.
Yeah. So then, and I kind of just, then I started having a bit of success and went to,
what age did you start getting success? So you started when you were 15, did you say? Was it 15?
Yeah, so probably 16 is when I properly started. It was my last year of GCSEs.
When did you start? When was your first time you're like, actually, I'm doing all right here? When was the first time? How many years? It was when you got to Loughborough?
So it was probably in my gap year, I started getting invitations to go on GB training camps, like GB under 23 training camps. And then in my first year of Loughborough, which was, 07-08, I went to the World University Rowing Championships, which sounds probably better than it actually is. But it was my first GB best, effectively.
Okay, yeah.
And where did we came fourth, which at the time was like devastating, but I mean, it's just a stepping stone.
I guess because when you get to that elite level, obviously the margins get much finer. So then it's like, unless it's gold and it's at the Olympics, it's like, it's never good enough, is it? There's always the next step up the ladder. But I guess now you're looking back on it in hindsight, I guess you can see it's quite nice to look at the progress, I guess, over time.
Yeah.
I guess sometimes you don't stop and appreciate how far you
are. You don't. No, we don't in life anyway, do we? We're always on for one goal and to the next, and then to the next, and you're never present just to say, actually, do you know what? I've done a good job here.
Pat on the back, yeah. And so then after the World Universities, then what was the kind of next phase after that?
Yeah, so then obviously it was 2012, wasn't it? So like everyone was talking about 2012. Even back in 2009, it was like 2012. And so I applied for a scholarship. I applied for the Loughborough scholarship, which was like spotting for like potential Olympians to kind of give you extra support. And that was a massive game changer because it basically just took a financial pressure off when I got that, which meant that I could spend more time on the water in Nottingham. Because obviously we're driving over every day from Loughborough to Nottingham, it takes its toll. So I think, and I just had a really good winter season from 08 to 9, and then ended up going on like maybe 3 or 4 of the senior training camps in that year, and then got selected for the under 23s, and then that year we won the under 23 World Championships. And so that had never been done in a female women's 8 before. So it was kind of really exciting time for the girls in the boat, but also kind of the future of British rowing for the women's team. And then that's kind of when it all kind of then kicked off. So I was put on a really small amount of funding, but it meant that you had like the physio support and just an eye from the national team kind of looking in on you, checking what was going on. You're accountable to someone effectively. And then I spent my last year of uni just traveling back and forward so the national team trained in Reading. So I was basically like doing 3 days in Loughborough, then 4 days down with the team in Reading.
Wow.
So it was a weird university experience
Yeah.
because I never ever went out. Like I'd be getting home, I'd be going out to training as my housemates were coming back from nights out.
Yeah.
Which was quite bleak.
And so, and what year was this? So this was kind of 2011 maybe?
2010, 11, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then
yeah.
what was the lead up to 2012? Tell us about your first on run to the Olympics.
It was amazing. It was really, really cool. I think in hindsight...
How does it work with selection? Sorry, that'd be also...
Oh, yeah. So selection for the rowing team, your season goes from kind of September to August or September to July, depending on the year. And effectively, you have to... It's like almost like... In simple terms, it's like a knockout. So you have your first set of trials, and if you do well enough, you get invited to your next set. If you do well enough, you get invited to your next set. If you do well enough, you get invited to final trials. So they're kind of like, maybe, I can't remember off the top of my head, like end of September, October, December, February, and then final trials are in April.
Oh, okay.
And then in April, they might do a bit of seat racing. They'll put crews together. And then you race at a series of World Cups. So you've got 3 World Cups and a European Championships, and then you have your World Championships. So you have kind of 5 international races throughout the year.
Yeah, and then what? And so if you start it's kind of winter, and you get invited to the first lot selection. Obviously, that's a big pool of athletes going. Is it a big group of athletes going in? And obviously, it gets whittled.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. There's loads. So
and what do you get tested on? That'd be good to find out. Like
So basically. And it does change, so it changes kind of through Olympic cycles, and it changes for men and women. But for the women, when I was trialing, everyone had to be in their single scull at the beginning, and that's hard because if you're not a single sculler, I mean, you can't really escape that. It's just you and your boat, and that is it. And lots of people are kind of they'll go into a crew boat and add way more value than they would in terms of their singles results, if that makes sense.
So it's not just like a direct transfer that like you get some people that are better rowing in teams than they are on their own. Interesting.
Yeah. And some, like, and vice versa, you might get some people amazingly talented and quick in their single, but you put them in a crew boat and they're an absolute boat stopper. It's just
boat stopper.
Yeah. So and actually to say, like, between, and I'd be curious if other sports, people that you've chatted to have this as well, but from under 23 to senior is a massive step up, because you're all of a sudden you might be 22 and competing against other 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
And then the minute you turn 23, you're competing against 30-year-olds who've been to like 3 Olympic Games already, potentially.
Definitely.
And there's also a massive gap in your funding. So like you get there's almost like a separate pot of funding that's available for under 23 athletes, and then a pot of funding that's available for senior athletes, but you only kind of get access to that once you're in the team.
Interesting.
So there's like this weird kind of, it's a year that often, like that transition year, often lots of people quit.
Make or break.
It's make or break, and it's tough. If you're, you have to be, so for the rowing team, you have to be down south most of the time, because that's where the national team train, and you want to make the most of any opportunity you get to train there. But house prices and rent and everything down here is savagely expensive.
Yeah.
And so then often you're training kind of full time to make the team, but you're also having to work part time to fund your training.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like your recovery is non-existent, basically, because when you're supposed to be resting, you're having to work, but you're competing against athletes who are funded, who are able to rest.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to break into the team.
It's like the environment around the sport plays a major role on like how and who and how gets selected, I guess.
Yeah, and especially in amateur sports or Olympic sports, because if I for example, if I played for Henley Hawks rugby. I don't know about the women, but I know certainly the men, they get paid per game. And that's, you think how, no disrespect to Henley Hawks, they're a great team, but they're not a Premiership team, are they? Yeah. Whereas you could be competing and kind of one seat away from being in an Olympic class boat, but you have no funding whatsoever and no real sponsorship, because let's face it, rowing's pretty boring to watch, isn't it, right? And
yes, I guess it comes down to the spectator fees, I guess, is where it comes in, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about 2011, obviously for the Olympics. So we've kind of
Yeah.
Does that same pattern of season structure happen every year? And obviously then there's like a intensification obviously each year that it gets closer to the Olympics. Is that how it works?
Exactly. Yeah. And they try and select. So like if you've done really well in 09, 10, 11 and you've medalled, say for example, in every World Championships, you might be a bit more protected as a unit.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, it is intense the whole time and people are still, right up until selection, you're fighting for your seat often. So in 2011-12 season, I was trialing to get into the senior team. I did okay at a couple of the first trials and then I got invited into the team in like the November, December, but actually it was to fill a boat because someone had got injured. So I just made the most of that opportunity. And because I knew at that point I was never going to be like the biggest or strongest athlete, I basically made it my mission to be the best enabler. So if they needed me to row one side, I'd row one side. If they needed me to be on another side, I'd do another side. I'd make the calls, I'd steer, because I knew they would never build a boat around me because I just wasn't big enough and strong enough or quick enough or good enough.
I guess maybe for you at that moment in time, obviously with taking into account your age, obviously the Olympics, etc., and everything you spoke about, the fact that obviously that transition from under 23s to senior, I guess the people that are now, I don't know if this is true or not, because obviously I'm very uninformed on it, but are the people that are 30 or whatever and have done a couple of Olympics, did they start out doing that for other people or?
Yes, they would have done. I mean, some people are just kind of born with this talent, and they obviously work hard. This talent is one thing, but obviously you've got to put the grind in, and they maybe make the jump a bit quicker. And other people will literally crawl, and they'll just go step by step by step. My journey was definitely this. It was like every inch I had to kind of really work for.
Right.
But they would have done, and as the team is kind of, the changes in elite sport has been massive over the last 20 years because we went from being especially in rowing, being non-central to being centralised. So the whole team now train from one place, whereas before you'd have pockets of, people in Nottingham, people in London, people, all over the place that come together before a race. But yeah, they would have gone through that. Yeah, I also think with London, it was an interesting year because probably people that should have retired after Beijing didn't,
100%.
Because they were holding on for the home Olympics.
Yeah.
So the caliber of athlete was high, and also the experience within the athletes were high. So you had a lot of returning Beijing medalists.
Yeah. And how to play
but
the
with
game.
that, yeah, you had to, and with that you had a lot of injuries. So basically, I was drafted into the team because someone got injured, and then I managed to kind of get myself into a good boat for trials. And I think at the time, I genuinely believed I had a shot of going to the Olympics in London. And there was so much hype about it. And because Pam, my sister, she's a Paralympic rower and was going to the Paralympics in London, there was a lot of hype about us because it was like one sister in the able-bodied team, one in the disabled team or para team. And there was a lot of hype, a lot of energy. But I think in hindsight, like when I think back about it now, I mean, it was going to be such a long shot for me to make it. And I think that even in the back of my head and the team all thought great potential for Tokyo and beyond. It was Rio and beyond. It was never, she's a dead set for London, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not to say it wasn't bloody disappointing when I didn't get a seat, and it's always like brutally hard because you watch people that you trained with day in, day out go, and you want them to do well, but part of you's really jealous, and part of you's like, then you feel bitter, and then you feel guilty because you're jealous. It's like these weird emotions. It's just
100%. Yeah, no, interesting. And so, how close were you for like making the team for 2012?
So I was the next person in. They select their team, and then they basically. I think I can't even remember how many athletes it is now. 19 for the women, and then me and my partner were kind of the next two.
Okay. So that must have been.
But and also, to be fair, even if you are a spare, the likelihood of them even ever using you is really, really low because they probably want to use someone who's actually in a boat. It's a complicated.
Yeah, I can
complicated
imagine.
one.
Okay,
yeah.
Interesting. And so, obviously, not major disappointment. Well, I guess maybe at the time, major disappointment. But then, what were kind of the thoughts and feelings after that? Was it right, kind of back onto the erg?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's actually a springboard. So we ended up racing at the Europeans that year. They kind of sent a half squad, half development crew to the Europeans, and we won a medal there, which was amazing. And it was a really nice end to the season because it had been a brutally long season. Yeah. And then it was just back into the Olympic cycle. So then kind of, that feeling like going back to school in September and everyone's like got their new pencil case. I didn't have a new pencil case, but rock up to Caversham where we trained, and it was just like, the next 4 years you have your briefing, this is the structure of the year. And on a non-Olympic year, you're probably on a training camp every other month. And we would go 2 weeks in Portugal, like just on the water and big heavy weights and ergos. Then we'd spend time in Mallorca cycling. And then you just, do other bits and pieces. And then you'd enter that kind of World Cup season that I was talking about, where you do your selection and your World Cups.
Yeah.
Actually, 20 after 2012, it was a really cool year because we had the first World Cup was in Australia.
Yeah.
So the whole team went out to Australia for 3.5 weeks, and that was really, really cool.
Yeah.
And racing in at 8 a.m. in the morning when it was 40 degrees. It was mad.
Yeah.
And then the World Championships that year were in Korea. So we had good travel that year. Because most of the time you're in places like Poznan in Poland or, some Eastern European country where, it's like something out of the 1970s when you walk around.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
And coming off the back of obviously the Olympics and going into that next year, what was your feeling? Was your feeling like, right, Rio, that's the focus now. I'm going to spend the next 4 years. This is my time.
Yeah. Exactly that. It was all about kind of building, like I said to you before, I didn't have a big physiology. We had to do 2,000 meter ergo tests, and that's part of our submission to get kind of through to trials. Mine was hands down always the worst in the team. What someone could do on a bad day, it would be like a good day for me to do. So I was always kind of battling against just having a bit of a crap physiology, really. And I actually, in hindsight, again, it's such a wonderful thing. I don't think I have a crap physiology. I think my training wasn't right for me. And that is my one thing I kind of really regret. I just wish I'd had the balls to say, no, I'm not doing that. It's not right for my physiology. But I think when you're in that grey area of always being the last person in the boat, you just have to do what you can. When there's the coach saying, you need to do this, you need to do that, you're almost too scared and you don't have the permission because you've never been quite good enough to do your own thing.
Interesting.
And that's a curse of being in.
No, I was going to say it's a really interesting point. I guess there's lots of athletes out there who are competing now, and people that obviously we know, and people that are listening to this. I guess that you have there's many ways to skin a cat, isn't it? It's it's the idea that there's lots of different ways to the top of the mountain, and actually, I guess for you in a physiological sport like that, I guess finding what really works when you're also trying to fit into a team. I guess, and they're obviously they maybe have more. I don't know if they have more cookie cutter type training programs, or dependent on the coach, I guess, as well, who's in charge at that time and what their theory and ideas around how training
works
exactly. So I guess I guess it's one of those weird ones that's like flip of a coin, isn't it?
And it's the age old thing. If you're not in the team, you have all this freedom to do what you want to do, but ultimately you're doing that so you can make the team to go to the Olympics. So unless you're at the top of your game and you're in the team, and even then you kind of have to follow a program, but you have more, what's it called, artistic license to do what you need to do to make yourself as quick as you need to. But we used to do a lot of steady state. I remember you would even say it, when we used to train in base, I'd be on the bike for an hour and you'd be like, oh, I'm doing sprints, and an hour is not even a long session when you're in the rowing team. I've got a friend who's still in the team now, and she did something crazy, like a 4.5 hour bike on a static bike the other day. But essentially we did a big bulk of UT2, and I think when you think back to the physiology stuff we did at uni, I just was in the wrong zone the whole time. I should have backed right off and just done the same volume but a lot, rather than just pushing every set, because then my recovery, I could never recover enough, ever.
I see this a lot, actually. Chris Beardsley, the strengthconditioningresearch.com, big shout out to Chris, is one of the main, he's a kind of his whole, I don't know if you ever checked out any of his stuff, but he's really delving into the science around recovery now, because obviously the two parts, we've obviously got stress plus rest equals growth, right? And this idea, and I think we're all guilty of it, especially being at the elite end, is that we're so focused on the stressing part and the loading and the periodization of loading, but everyone seems to forget obviously the adaptation happens in the recovery periods after training. And what you're finding now, and a lot of the research is showing, that we actually need more recovery than we realize, and we need more time for that adaptation to happen, especially as you start reaching the upper echelons of and get closer towards kind of peak performance, because the more intensity comes with more damage in different forms, whether it's muscular, skeletal, whether it's tenderness, whether it's central nervous system, whether it's biochemical, or probably a lot in your case. And those systems, we're a biological process, and those systems we're not robots. It doesn't just happen automatic. We're not cars or machines, right? So
and we're all different. We all respond differently.
100%.
And I do think there's been massive steps, even in the kind of 5 years that I haven't been rowing, which feels like longer than that now. There's been huge step-ons, huge, and even when I went back in the team, like, we had good support. Like, we'd have our lactates done all the time. They'd measure stresses in the morning. They did a lot of that, but I just wish I'd been a bit braver to do what was right for me, rather than always being a kind of slave to the system.
100%. And I think some of that comes even with the coaching as well. I guess there's such pressure, and it's the same as like in business. I guess it's the same kind of thing, is that there's such pressure to make gains that it's easy. It's very easy just to think, oh, like, maybe we can add this in or add that in, or this has to be done. And actually, I guess it comes down to some of the experience of the coach, and obviously, like you said, about being brave and using metrics, obviously being able to track stuff where you can, so you can obviously measure and know kind of if you're making progress towards the goals. But I think it's really interesting that you've experienced that firsthand. And I guess just because you're at the elite level, it brings it out. It comes down to those millimeters, it comes down to those inches, it comes down to the small percentages. So I think because you're trying to squeeze out and find that optimal setup is with obviously so much chaos going on within the program, it must be very tough. So
there's less room for
error, 100%.
Isn't there?
100%. What about so you kind of got back into the cycle, you did the Europeans, and then tell us about the run up to Rio.
Yeah, so truthfully, like, my position in the team never really changed. Like, I was definitely always at the bottom end of the team. So like, when I say to people, oh God, I was never very good at rowing, like, let's put it into perspective, I was still in the national team, but because I was with people that were winning double gold medals at the Olympics, it's just, it's so
relative.
It is relative. But essentially, so 2013-14 season went, and then it was basically coming into the 2014-15 season. So that's the year that you have to qualify your boat for the Olympics. So you have to come, if for example, you're racing in the women's 8, you have to come top 5 in order to automatically qualify your place in the Olympic Games. So it's almost as important as the Olympic year, because if you don't qualify, you're not there. It's almost like the rights to race. Or you have to qualify a horrendous qualification regatta where the stakes are just brutal and it's really, really hard. So that was the year that I was like, right, this is the year for me. Like, this is where I'm going to really kind of push on. I'm going to attack everything to 100%. Like, I'm not going to leave any stone unturned, because if I can get myself into a seat in 2015, the chances are that that's going to then springboard me into 2016. And I had a really, really, really good start to the season, actually. Like, I remember, I think they did a recce. They went to Rio for a recce, a 1-week recce, and I didn't go. And so I kind of used that as my advantage. So like, all the girls and boys in the team went off to Rio, and they having to, cope with jet lag and stuff. And it was fun, but great. I was at home training hard. And I just basically pushed every session to the nth degree. And I'd always struggled to put on muscle, and like, my PBs on my bench press were just significantly crapper than everyone else in the team. So I was like, I'm just going to hit everything really hard. And then I got a bit of a niggle in my back in the December of 2014, and kind of just brushed it under the carpet and didn't really, it'll be fine, have physio, whatever. And then in January, it kind of spread to my hips, and it was just really bad. So I ended up having a scan, and I'd basically got a tear in one of the muscles in my hip, and I had some bone growth going on. It was all really messy, and ended up having to go in for surgery at the end of January of 2015, which obviously in the year that you're trying to qualify your boat isn't ideal. And that is essentially the start of the end of my rowing career. So yeah, I had surgery. I was on crutches for like 6 weeks. I was so depressed. I just couldn't, you know, I basically didn't leave the house for 6 weeks. And all the rest of the team were off, you know, training, whatever. And basically it was going into like a period of rehab. So it was like working out what, when working out the best way for me to get back into a boat so I could be ready for the trialing process for the Rio cycle. And my rehab was really good, actually. I spent a lot of time in the IRU, which is the EIS's intensive rehabilitation unit, and they are incredible. Like you basically turn up and you have this triage of support. You have like a physiologist, an S&C coach, a physio, a doctor, a nutritionist, a psychologist, and every morning they sit down and they map your day out. And I was in there with some other Olympians from different sports, which was really good, because I think had I been in there with rowers, it wouldn't have been so good, just because of where my head was at. And I spent 2 weeks there, and then you go away and do your own training for like a month, and then I went back for 2 weeks. And yeah, just my S&C coach he just ripped the piss out of how weak I was the whole time. But I was on this mega hypertrophy program, and basically I think I went into my rehab at like 71 kilos. And by the time I'd finished finishing my rehab in like the November, I was 80 kilos. And I wasn't fat. It was like, I was just a big old G unit. I would split blazers, putting my blazers on, they would be splitting down the back because I was so hench.
That's cool.
Yeah, cool if you're into that type of thing. I mean, I look at some of the photos now and just can't believe how big my arms were. Where they've gone.
And then so did you make it back? You came back stronger? You came back?
Yeah, so I came back stronger, absolutely. And like for the first time in my entire career, I was like actually being able to lift the weights the other girls were. But truthfully, I was so far away from where I needed to be in terms of boat speed. And although I was a big old G unit, I wasn't cardiovascularly any better on.
You transfer.
And the coaches they were just really honest. I mean, it was brutal at the time, but I had a meeting with the head coach, and he was just like, look, you're not going to make Rio. You're not strong enough for us. You're not ready to go back onto a full-time program. You're not good enough for us to build a boat around you that would be happy to do 1 water session and then 2 swims. And we need you to be doing 3 water sessions a day. And there was lots of positivity, but it's like essentially like, you're not going to go to Rio. Feel free to come back and try again for Tokyo, but thanks, but no thanks.
They have to be quite blunt, don't they? I guess when it comes down to it, I guess it's one of those weird ones. It's just really bad timing. Do you reckon the hip and back was brought on because you went hell for leather? Like, do you think, is it one of those ones where
I think had I not
exacerbated it?
I think, yeah, definitely did, because I just ignored it for so long. I ignored the pain for like 6 weeks, maybe even longer. But I think fundamentally, like, I mean, in rowing, you go into deep flexion, like, you know, of your hip socket. I think I worked it out, actually. Like, it's thousands of times a day when you're doing, you know, if you've got 3 big sessions and you're doing like hundreds of K a week, you know, you're constantly going to that deep flexion. It's a lot. And I think it was always there anyway. I'd struggled with injury quite a lot throughout my whole career anyway. But I think I just pushed it to the nth degree.
Interesting. And I guess some of what you're saying, even like when I think about strength training, I think the strength's like the glue that holds the body together, right? And I guess if that's something that you needed to work on and needed to develop, I guess if you were always feeling like it was lacking, obviously that probably played into the injury, and wasn't optimal. And so then basically, so they said, so that was 2015. Obviously they went to Rio, and then what was your kind of exit? What was the?
So when you're funded by UK Sport, you have access to a performance lifestyle advisor through the EIS, and they're basically your off-water coach. So they'll help you with like whether you want to, with your CV, both during your time as an athlete, but also off the back of it. They'll help you with your transition. They help you with researching courses, and they're actually just an amazing person to like figure out who you are if you're not an athlete.
Yeah.
I spent like 10 years being like known as, oh, Monica, she rows on, you know, oh, this is my friend Monica the rower. And then all of a sudden I was like just not that person, and it was just weird, because also then I was joining the world of work at 28, when like people had, you know, I'm looking at graduate jobs at 28, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just that when you've been at, you know, in elite level sport, like you know, in the best kind of group in the country, into looking at entry level jobs, it's just a bit of a blow. And that 2016 year was hard, because I'd started work, so I'd done a bit of part-time work when I was rehabbing just to keep myself sane, and I went full-time, and I think I probably took the amount of energy and passion and dedication I'd had in sport straight into a startup, which it's good for a lot of reasons, but also then I basically had no life, so I transferred all of the time and energy I had with rowing into this company. And then Rio came along, and you know, people won medals, and it was amazing for the British women's team, because we won multiple medals, but it's also really hard, because you're thinking, that could have been me. But at the same time, you want to be really supportive, and it's amazing for the sport, and you just got to take it, you know. And some of my best friends are winning medals. Doesn't stop it from being painful as well at the same time, you know.
I understand that. Interesting. And so we've kind of gone through the timeline.
And now it's the battle of like trying to stay fit and working full time. The old corporate athlete, I like to call myself now. So wanky.
There's some really interesting, there's some really insightful stuff in there actually, and it's really thanks for kind of taking us through from start to end. And I think like I was saying to you before we came on the call, that being in elite sport, it's obviously tough. There's a really small amount of people that make it, right? And I think for anybody listening to this, obviously that it's extremes, isn't it? It brings out like any small deficit or anything that isn't quite right. It will bring it out, and it will show, and it makes you vulnerable, right? And I guess it's
100%.
It's there. It's black and white. The numbers don't lie, right? And I guess obviously there's obviously some subjectivity, but what I
battle with sometimes, I think, is because I'm a big believer in like, I'm not good enough yet, and like if you put time and effort and energy and focus into something, you can be better.
It's a great
I'm 100% believer in that, and both in like business, in life, in relationships, in everything. And I sometimes wonder whether, or worry that notion of, well, if you work hard enough, you can do it, actually is quite disempowering, disillusioning, is that a word? Disillusion?
I think just go with it. It sounds right.
But so basically there was this person, me, who did put everything into it, and I tried everything, and I felt like I put my essentially like self on the line for it. But my talent was never good enough. So I'm not trying to say that it's not about hard work, but talent, like natural talent, and just being sometimes in the right place at the right time, or having those opportunities in the right place at the right time, accounts for so much. And I sometimes think that the narrative in the media is that hard work gets you everywhere. Yeah, hard work gets you really far, but if you're born and you're 6'5" and you've got the lungs like a racehorse, and you've got, that is going to take you one step ahead,
I think that's really that's one of the wisest things I think I've had somebody say on the podcast so far. I think no, it is it's so true. It's this idea that you can get better. You can, like, I'll use sprinting as an example, right? You can get faster. If you go out and do the training, you can get faster, but not everybody's going to be a Usain Bolt. Not everybody's going to be like, to put it into a practical example, like you can get faster. And I guess, but I think I think it's really interesting what you say about the media, is this idea that, and I think it's really a good way, it's not debunking, but it's good to be realistic, I think. And that sense of realism, actually, without making people too over optimistic or too, I think it's from the outset, I think matching talent and hard work together is ideal. And I think you obviously have to be in it to win it. And obviously it's taken you to an amazing place, and it's made you meet loads of amazing people, and you've had loads of amazing experiences as well.
100%. I wouldn't be the person I was had it not been, for that first talent identification process, like 12 years ago, whatever it is
One of
now.
those weird ones is kind of, you've got to be in it to win it, haven't you? But then also be able to recognize that maybe that there's always somebody. I always say there's always somebody bigger, faster, stronger, and
Of course there is.
actually, and how life works, I guess, is that everything has to come together at the right time, and obviously the likelihood of that happening in the optimal way that we demand, I think, is obviously the chances are very slim. But on the flip side of that, the experiences and the things that you've learned and the experience that you've had that no one will ever, like a very small percentage, not no one, but a very small percentage of people will have those types of experiences, is obviously, is amazing.
And it makes you so resilient. Like, I think that failing, actually, you learn so much more from failing. Like if I'd sailed through and made the Olympics, and obviously you're going to have your ups and downs, but I feel like I've come through some really annoying things, especially in terms of my rowing career, that haven't gone right. But they've absolutely made me the person I am today. And like, you've got to be resilient in this day and age, and coping with that uncertainty is, you know, sport can do that, absolutely. And genuinely, even non-elite sports. So if you're just a passionate runner and you love to do your half marathons, and like putting yourself under that immense pressure to try and go for a PB, whether it's a sub 1:15 half marathon or a sub 2 hour, wherever you are, like, I love that. That's so empowering, putting yourself out there and putting yourself into a position where you're going to hurt yourself, and because life is hard. So if you can practice going through those trials and tribulations every morning on your 5K run or in the weights room, you're just going to be better equipped to cope with life.
You've literally just hit, that's like, you've just pulled out the inspirational gem that I was looking for. But there's this idea that me and Dean were talking about this on the last podcast, this idea that it's about being process driven. It's about being in love with the craft. And like you said about the media, it's like, we're so focused on the outcome. We're so focused on the goal that actually we end up missing the journey on the way sometimes. And actually, I think there does need to be a mainstream movement. Obviously, I think there's an idea for a business here for you.
Okay, come on.
But this idea that it's about falling in love with the craft. It's about falling in love with the process of bettering yourself, whether that's even just on, like you said, even on a small level, like from the couch to 5K type athlete all the way through to the elite level. It's this idea about being in love with the process and recognizing that you have the opportunity to go far, but the likelihood of that happening is obviously small. But it doesn't mean that shouldn't be the kind of barrier to entry. It should be the reason why we should be doing it is to
the reason we should get into it, definitely. And I think that actually links really nicely to the whole talent identification thing, because the reason that this World Class Start program was really special is because and I don't know the stats, I think when we were at uni, it was something like 70% of the medals won in Beijing came from public schools, of which only at that time 8% of the UK population were at a public school. So like, and especially then that's like multiplied for rowing, because it's seen as a very kind of rich person's sport, right? So it's at all of the private schools, it's not at state schools. I wouldn't ever have started rowing, never in a million years have gone down to, and I lived in Cambridge, but I would never have done that because it was deemed as a posh person's sport. And I just think that the more people can start exploring even just what they'd like to do physically, don't think about the barriers that are in your way. There's so many opportunities now to try out different things and try out different sports. And with rowing, the community element and the volunteering to keep the rowing clubs going in this country is amazing. So if there's any parents listening and you think, oh, my kids would probably enjoy splashing around on the water, I'd definitely encourage you to just Google where your nearest rowing club is, because they love it. The volunteers at clubs just love, getting kids out and getting them rowing and having fun.
Brilliant. Super inspirational. I think I think we should probably leave it there. I think that's a great way to finish. No,
cool.
Really, if people want to hear or speak to you or send you any questions, what's the best place to get hold of you?
Oh, I don't know.
Maybe nowhere.
No, just don't. Don't get hold of me. Well, for all the questions that are going to come bombarding, what, Instagram? Is that where you're going to put this up?
Yeah, I can put. Yeah, this will go up on YouTube. But if
okay, or YouTube,
yeah,
or
we can put a link
hit
to
me up on.
Yeah, we can put a link to you just in case there's anybody out there who's got a burning question or a
I'm sure there'll be
team
plenty
who wants to try and coax you back.
Yeah, lots of adoring fans, I'm sure.
Guys, if you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button. Obviously, it helps us with the YouTube algorithm. Also, hit subscribe and notification bell. So when we produce more cool content like this, you'll be the first to get it. Monica, I really appreciate your time.
Cool. No, love to speak to you, Si.
Really appreciate it.
Cool. Take care.